Hi, my name is Emma Brigham, and today I'll be going over the Israeli and Jewish food culture, Ashkenazi and Sephardic, and talking about the different aspects of those two ones specifically. Now, I'm just going to give brief overall history, and this does dive into the concept of the food culture because of how it shows how they migrate and move all the time. So, biblical times, 17th towards the 6th century of BCE, before Christ, was the period of Egyptian slavery, Moses. Then they finally resettled in Israel after Moses led them to Egypt, conquered by Babylonia, and then they were exiled again. So you can see there's a lot of back and forth, and I do think this contributes to differences in the food culture. Now, the Second Temple period was 538 to 142 before Christ times, and the Persian period, and you can see there was a lot of people ruling in this time, from 63 BCE to 313 was the Roman rule, and this was also when it said Christ was to have been there. Now, for foreign ruling, this is when people took over, so you have um, the Arab, the Crusaders, the Ottoman rule, and then once we get into 1918 to 1948, we had British rule. And then I think we all know the history of the Holocaust, 1948, finally, the state of Israel was proclaimed, though. And then there was a lot of mass Arab and Europe immigration, which happened. And I think this contributes of overall just showing how there was just so much moving around throughout this history of time. Now, the geography very much influences the food culture. It's a small area overall with short distances when we get into Israel, but there are a lot of mountains and plains, deserts. It's very, very fertile. It's known for its agriculture. There's streams and rainfall all year long. They have many lakes. The largest lake they have is surrounded by agriculture communities. They have the Jordan Valley, which is specifically very, very fertile land. And then it is very humid in the summer, and then mild winters, typically, but that's mostly on the coast. Let's say we're talking about the mountain and the valleys; those are more pleasant and mild. So, although there is little differences in each place in Israel, overall it kind of has the same pattern going on. Now, the Ashkenazi and Sephardic are the two Jewish categories that we will be specifically diving into. And I think it's important we focus on the history and culture there. Now, for Sephardic, that is the Hebrew name for Spain. So that kind of gives you an idea on who this group is. And basically, starting from the 3rd century, there were Jewish settlers in Spain. And eventually, they were, by royalty at the time, chased off kind of into Portugal. And there they kind of migrated from Spain as well. I mean, resettled. But during their time there, they developed their own language, which I believe you refer to as Ladino. And they had many Jews expelled, though, eventually, as I said. And then eventually the Jews dispersed everywhere and became very dominant in Jewish culture and wherever they relocated. Now, for the Ashkenazi, this is believed to be a Roman name, and this was more towards 10th century that we see that migration towards Europe, such as Germany and all those places. And there were waves of extinction and murders, and basically that's why they migrated towards the east. But then even then, so there was obviously the scourge of Nazis and that takeover of the Holocaust. And the language that they speak is Yiddish, I believe is how you pronounce. And this is a mix of German, Hebrew, and a lot of European languages. Meanwhile, we obviously see in Sephardic culture that that's a mix of Spanish or Portuguese. So those are the two categories in their history overall. Now, oops, press the wrong button. Okay. So for Ashkenazi food culture, this is very reflective of their European settlement, which is a quarter region, and this is where the geography very much ties in. So, because of the fact it's due to the weather that it influenced the food. So, for example, there was very heavy cuisine for winters. Like they had really dominant winters, which means they did their best to collect a lot of meat, potatoes, not collect, but gather resources to make meat, potatoes, pasta, bread, pastries, and just heavy foods such as that. And the traditional, I believe, say Shabbat food, Jewish food, is cholent, and this is more food that's recognized in American ways, Ashkenazi, that category, because of the fact it's more seen by cooks here, and it's, I believe, the Ashkenazi is the largest group of Jews there is. And I provided pictures where you can kind of see what the food looks like, and you'll see in the next slide that it's actually really similar to how it is Sephardic culture as well. The two are almost the same. It's just they do have a different name for it, and there are little minor differences. Now, for Sephardic food culture, this is very, again, reflective of the geography of Spain and Portugal migration that they had. And obviously, they then resettled to the Mediterranean, which was a very sunny climate. And there they had much more access to fresh vegetables, fish, fruits, spices, olives. And obviously, these foods are more lighter, healthier, even more colorful. And it's said that it's called either chaman or haman, and that's to the traditional Jewish Shabbat stew. And I'm going to get into, because chaman is what I was referring to in the last slide when I was talking about cholent, how they're very similar. And basically, they're overall stews, but they are made for a specific purpose, and this has to do with the Jewish religion and culture. And you'll see that's why they're very similar. And even though obviously these food cultures are very different, they both created a very similar food item because of their religion. And I will get into explaining that. And now we're talking about that food, the cholent or the haman. And this is again traditional Jewish stew. And cooking is not permitted during this day, but it is a day where they basically celebrate and will eat meat. So how can they do that if they can't cook? And that's where this dish is able to be prepared the day before. So they will cook it at night, and then it is able to stay in the oven all night, all day until they choose to eat. And all they have to simply do is take it out of the oven after it's prepared the night before. And the stew is consists of meat and potatoes and beans typically. I believe for chaman it doesn't necessarily have all of those, and I think it has more spices. Basically, there's just different spices within the two, and they're prepared very differently. But with it being in the oven, they don't have to light a fire. They don't need to heat it up. It's very just it completely takes out them having to cook it all. So it's very simple and easy. And these are my references, but going back to the last slide, I do want to show the map. I believe you can see it's European countries in the green. So this is obviously where the Ashkenazi relocated to at some point in the 10th century, I believe. And then you can see more of the Sephardic Spain type of countries in the yellow. So I did want to provide that photo as a map. And then I want to go back to the food culture here in Sephardic. You can kind of see how there is more colorful foods, especially in that top right picture. You can see the green, the red, and this supports the contradiction of there being more spices and colors. And then you can see it's a little more plain here in the Ashkenazi. And then I did want to go to explain the two maps. I have one photo that really just shows exactly where it is, and then the other kind of shows what it's surrounded by, and I think that's important to know geography wise. And then the overall history, that is the flag. And these are my references in APA format. And sorry, let me get to this slide. But yes, that definitely is a very specific part of the Israel food culture that I thought was really important to focus on. And I had never heard of these two differences. And I was interested in whether food culture would be something that was influenced, and it was just a small maybe. But then I really did the research and found out how huge this food differences, and I thought it would be really interesting to dive into that. So again, these are my references, and thank you very much. Thank you.